I'm Pat Halpin, and welcome to this special edition of Meet the Leaders, coming to you from the capital of the state of New York, Albany. And we've been joined by New York State Senator John Brooks. Senator Brooks, it's great to have you. This is now your second legislative opening, new legislature.
New legislature.
Except you go from being in the minority to being in the majority.
Right.
And they say that you are part of the six-pack of Democrats from Long Island that are going to have a lot of say over what happens for Long Island.
Yeah, and I think we will, first and foremost. And I think it is a new day in Albany. For us, the first 2 years, you were in the minority. You couldn't get much done. You couldn't get bills moved, and it was tough to find money. Now we're in the majority, and I think at a critical time. There's a lot of critical issues that we are facing at the state level and the national level. For New York State and for our region, Long Island, as well as other regions in the state, taxes are a big issue.
Yeah,
and
especially with the loss of the full deductibility.
Well,
of state
that's where I was
taxes.
going.
Yeah.
I mean, that became compounded by the limitations put on state and local tax deductibility in federal income taxes. On Long Island in particular, as you know, school taxes are the number one tax in terms of percentage. And as we looked at it last year when the federal tax law was passed, we did a study looking at how schools were funding and percentage of funding coming from different sources. If we oversimplify it, school funding is a combination of local property taxes, commercial property taxes, and state aid. Recognized in the new federal tax law, it's only the local property taxes that are subject to that cap.
That's interesting. You've just put a spin on this, or give it a perspective that makes it even more interesting, because the federal amount of aid going to local education is not much.
No, it's not. But we're in a situation. Yes. So here's what happens.
Yeah.
When you look at the state, and what we did is we looked at how much everybody was spending, every single school district in the state, and how they were funding it. And we were looking at the percentage of funding that was coming from property taxes only, residential property taxes. And in many, many areas, it was up close to 80% of the cost being funded. Now, if you realize that's 80% of total spending, that's going to be well over the $10,000 cap in so many cases.
Of course.
So it's now a punitive measure. You're losing the taxes that you were spending, or that you were funding. Right. You lost that deductibility, and then state aid, in the end, is also funded from income taxes. So you're in a situation when you get into that higher percentile that you're losing money. So just for numbers, somebody's paying $20,000 in property taxes. They lost 10 on deductibility. They're taxed on that. At the same time, they're sending money to Albany through income taxes being used for state aid, getting no benefit for that. They're being punished, if you will,
right,
for helping somebody else. So one of the things we did in that legislation last year, and we're renewing that bill again this year, is to put a maximum limit of funding education by means of residential property taxes of 50% of the total cost of education.
How do you make that up?
Well, what we're going to do is we're going to fund it through the general fund. And we're going to transfer if you will, the excessive property tax burden to the state as a whole and give some tax relief for those people. Now, when we looked at that on a statewide basis, there were school districts in every county in the state, with the exception of the 5 boroughs of New York, that would qualify for relief. Some areas more so than others because they get less state aid and they have a higher tax level. We realize the federal tax laws right now are going to hurt New York State without question, and those that have the highest property tax is going to hurt them the most. So we put together a bill that would put together 3 years of relief, putting a cap at 50%. And I think in that time, one or two things has to happen. We have to rethink how we're funding education and government, or we're going to get the federal tax laws to change. But we can't be in a situation where a community is funding, let's say, 80% of their educational costs by property taxes, and they're losing the deductibility. At the same time, they're funding additional money up to help other districts. It's a double penalty on that. So,
and of course, it's further compounded by the fact that Long Islanders pay more to the state than they get back.
Sure.
We pay more to the federal government than we get back.
Well, the old rules used to be that because you got the tax benefit, you could kind of justify that.
Yes.
Not anymore. Now the way the rule is, okay, you had a lot of taxes and we we're only going to let you take 10,000.
But you're getting
and
a
you
big
send
tax
money
deduction,
upstate,
yeah.
so we're going to smack you again.
Right.
You can't do that now. So I think the federal tax laws dramatically changed what's going on. I mean, we're seeing right now, in this past week, two of the congressmen here on Long Island are going to propose to put that put an end to that. But we've got to get that done. We are getting punished by the federal government, and we're not recognizing the full impact here.
You know, it's interesting you should say that because there's actually precedent for that. And because when California went to Proposition 13, which put a cap on the assessed valuation,
Right.
then what happened was that the state ended up picking up a greater share
Sure.
because they couldn't get it from the local
Yep,
property
yep,
taxpayer. And that was a very painful transition for the local public schools, but it did happen.
But it has to. You know, you look at what you have, and you know Long Island well. You have communities with a great deal of commercial property taxes, and you have communities with none. The ones that have no commercial taxpayers and not getting much in the state aid based on the formulas is getting killed. And we're in a situation now with this return, this new federal tax law, I should say. We have to make changes. So this is a bridge until we come up with a
So
solution.
let's talk about a couple of other issues. Obviously, you're right, is probably the most important, without a doubt. I know you're very concerned about the quality of drinking water, the threats of contaminants. You live and deal with the Bethpage plume, which is that problem on steroids. The state is about to adopt new regulations as it relates to various other chemical contaminants. There's no question that people are entitled to, should get the highest quality drinking water possible.
Right.
And when I mean it meets the highest standards.
Yeah.
What is the role that the state can play?
Well, I think it's a couple. First, to go to Bethpage. I think a lot of work has been done there. They're getting close to providing how they feel we can solve that. But you know what? We've got to again look to the federal government. That is a federal problem. They're not putting any funding forward
when the
for
Navy
that.
was there, they were building planes, they were dumping
That's
all
right,
of those
that's right,
contaminants
right.
literally down the drain.
Yep, you got that. It's moving down in a southerly direction. So we have to hold the federal government accountable, and we have to get them to start contributing. The governor has put the money forward so far, but Washington has to step up and recognize its responsibilities here. We're realizing more and more chemicals that we use, be it fertilizers or other problems, are in the water. We've got to eliminate that use and find ways to filter that stuff out. You know, we're in a unique situation. Our water source is right below us, and we have areas where we dump waste in landfills and other things, and that works its way down to the system. We've got a system where we're seeing some intrusion of salt water into our natural water system. We've got to take a good hard look at how we're using the water here, make sure we protect it. You know, last year, in the area, in much of my district, the New York American Water is the supplier of the water service, and their rates are excessively high. Number one, for a lot of reasons, but they're excessively high, and last year we had a public hearing because they put a rate filing in that penalized people during the summer months for using the water at an excessive rate, and some of the jumps people saw were off the wall, and much of that is being used to water the grass. So we're taking, if you will, pristine water to put it on the grass, and on the grass we're throwing fertilizers that are pollutants. Really intelligent operation. But one of the things that came out in those hearings was a suggestion from one guy that when we're dealing with the sprinkling systems at homes, to drill shorter wells and draw that water out, not the pristine water.
From the upper aquifer.
Absolutely. So I actually, I've been working with New York American Water. I had them in the office the other day, and I brought that up. They think that makes some sense to start watering the grass, not with the pure drinking water, but water that's percolating and way down. Yeah.
The upper glacial aquifer does not provide the drinking water.
So we need to really rethink how we're doing that. So I think we're in a situation where, one, as far as the Bethpage plume, we got to do what we're doing now and continue it, get the federal government involved. We've got to pass legislation that puts controls and limitations on the use of certain chemicals for fertilizers and other uses. And we really have to think about how we're utilizing those water sources. If we can get the same benefit for green lawn by taking that upper level and not that makes sense. After the elections, I went out to Las Vegas for a couple of weeks to visit some friends, they get a tax incentive if they don't have a green lawn. If they have what they call desert lawns, they get a tax break. We got to start thinking about that.
Water is precious.
Water is precious, but water is precious here too.
It is precious here too. We have run out of time. But I want to thank you so much for coming and wish you a happy New Year. And we look forward to seeing you again. And
Good
here's
to see you again,
great
sir.
year.
Right, very much. Thanks.
That's going to do it for this edition of Meet the Leaders. I'm Pat Halpin. We'll see you again next time.